Welcome back to the series where I answer your Godot questions.
Game Dev Journey.
Yeah, it's a good question. Because Godot is largely targeted or focused on the indie space, there's quite an aggressive pushback against AI. Indie game artists don't like AI. Godot itself no longer accepts AI-assisted code for updating the Godot engine from contributors. So yeah, it's a volatile thing in the indie dev space. People don't like it. You can see on the other side, in the proprietary engines, in the commercial engines, they're adopting AI big time. You look at Unity 7 and they've built AI generation right into the engine. So they're looking at the engine more as a tool to how can we produce the game quicker to increase our revenue. Whereas if you're using Godot and you're an indie dev, your game is more like your art, and you don't want anything to take away from your art. You are the auteur. You want to be the one who did everything. So that's the kind of perspective that they take in the Godot game dev scene. For me, from an educator's perspective, I see AI as a tool that can help you learn or consolidate your learning or help you understand what you're learning. So from that sense, I'm not against it. But in terms of it letting it do your homework for you, or kind of make the game for you, it's never going to be good, and you're not learning anything. So yeah, that's my perspective. Right. So, well, I think that your graphic and web design background will give you quite a big advantage in Godot, especially for user interface or user experience. As far as best practices go, Godot has a kind of a web-like layout system. What you would need to master are the control nodes and containers, because Godot's UI system works very similar to a modern web, what's that thing, Flexbox. So instead of placing buttons, with absolute pixel coordinates, you can build layouts using nodes like VBox container, HBox container. They have grid container, margin container, and these things will guarantee that your user interface will scale across the different resolutions and aspect ratios automatically. And then for dialog buttons and buttons, you can use 9-patch rect to scale things. That's going to make things nicer. It lets you slice the borders. Uses 9-slice scaling, so the background panels and the fancy frames, they can stretch to any size without blurring and distorting the corners. Two other key things that you'd need to master are in Godot itself are the theme system. I think I mentioned it sort of right in the beginning. You can actually create a central .theme resource, and that lets you set your global fonts, your colors, style box states, hover, pressed, disabled, all in one place, so that your whole game and the whole game's user interface stays visually consistent. And then for a clean user experience, you make use of Godot signals. Because you can connect the user interface logic using the signals, like the button up or value changed. Never ever hard code your game logic directly into user interface scripts. Just keep user interface purely reactive. Yeah, that's what I would recommend. Um, I wouldn't say, well, a big missing feature is that Godot doesn't have native export to consoles, but that's not necessarily Godot's fault. That's because the consoles themselves are proprietary. So, and Godot is open source. So, if Godot made that export to consoles available, then people would be able to see the source code and they'd know how to do it. So that's why it's locked in proprietary engines. So I would say that's the biggest hurdle, because a lot of people want to make games for console, and then they look at Godot and they say, well, Godot can't export for console, and you can't get a plugin to do it either. You have to go to a porting company. One of the big things that's changed recently is for multiplayer in Godot. It used to be port forwarding for peer-to-peer multiplayer used to be really difficult to do. But now there are two new built-in plugins that can do it. One is Godot Steam, and that allows you to use Steam's service to do the port forwarding for you. I think that's a really good solution. And the other solution is GD Sync, where they've also got a free tier that will do port forwarding for you. If you want dedicated servers, you're still going to have to pay someone, because someone's going to be running that server. But those are the two kind of plugins from the asset store that I can think of that are really useful. Yeah, that's a great question. I would say for an FPS with heavy graphics and terrain, Godot stacks up pretty well, actually, because Godot's 4, since Godot 4, it now uses the Vulkan renderer, and that handles modern visual features really well. It's got screen space, global illumination, volumetric fog. You can even use decals and custom 3D shaders if you want. It's very good at stylized shooters. Arena shooters would work well, those old school type boomer shooters. If your goal is photorealism, AAA, if you've been looking at Nanite and Lumen in Unreal, well then Unreal is the industry standard for that. For terrain, Godot doesn't have a native built-in terrain system yet. There might be one incorporated into the next build, a few builds down the line of Godot, but most developers rely on Terrain 3D. It's open source as well. It's basically an optimized C++ plugin, and it supports multi-layer texturing. It's got foliage, and it can handle very large maps. So what I would say is that if you're a solo or a small team, and you're building a fast-paced, stylized, or a double-A shooter, Godot offers fast iteration, no licensing fees, and it will work perfectly for that. But if you're building a sort of a massive, open-world, realistic military simulation, well, Unreal is going to be better out of the box. Okay, well that's a good question. What they're talking about there is localization, and that's like a common feature of software development as well. So, is there an automated way to do it in Godot? I think Godot does have support for multi-language games. I don't think that you have to hard code anything to get it working. How would it work? You would probably have to have some kind of a spreadsheet, that has translations for all the things in your game, and then you could load that into Godot's localization area. I think you go to project settings, localization, and then Godot would automatically swap, your user interface labels, the buttons and the dialogue text at runtime, depending on the player's system language, or all the selected locale, without you having to write custom, script logic for every text field. I don't think Godot does automatically, machine translate the language content itself. But you could probably make something like a CSV file, and you could try and use an AI tool to translate your dialogue, and then you could have Godot switch between the locales automatically.